Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to get into the Sabaton history for Uprising. This is going over, obviously, the Polish Uprising in Warsaw for the song Uprising that we did 2 days ago, I think. And then later today, I think I'm going to do a video that is something that I haven't done on the channel up to this point. I'm going to do a video where basically a bunch of random Americans are asked pretty simple history questions, and I want to see how well they do, right? So this will be first, and then that video will be out in just a little bit, but we're going to start with this Sabaton history uprising.
There are times when the struggle is so monumental that you know you will not win. You know you will not survive. And you know you will not even make great change. And yet you still make that fight.
And our song Uprising is about that.
This is Sabaton History, and I'm Spartacus Olson.
Spartacus!
I'm sitting in for Indy today because the current pandemic has left many of us stuck in different places over the past months and thrown our recording schedule around a bit. But I'm also the host and lead writer of the subseries War Against Humanity on our World War II channel, where I cover resistance, partisan warfare, war crimes, and crimes against humanity during the Second World War, which are also the topics of Sabaton's song Uprising. Okay, so it's July 1944. The Eastern Front is in motion. German Army Group Center has collapsed in the face of repeated offensives by the Soviet First Belarusian Front, now striking deep into Poland. It is widely expected that capturing Warsaw will be the next thing on the list of the Red Army objectives. With the end of the German occupation literally on the horizon, the leaders of the Polish underground resistance, the Armia Krajowa, or Home Army, meet for a secret meeting. After nearly 5 years of occupation, humiliation, and suffering, the resistance of Warsaw is eager to rise up. Radio calls are made to the exiled Polish government in London, who in turn appeal to the British and American authorities for help. The time has come. The Poles will now fight to take back their capital. However, the Western Allies are hesitant to promise help outright. They welcome resistance against the Germans, sure, but they do have logistical problems with the fight in France and Italy in full swing at the same time. But mostly, this is the Soviet theater of war, and they don't want to step on any toes, so the Poles will have to rely on Soviet cooperation first and foremost. However, the position of the Home Army towards the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the weirder ticks about World War II is that once there is an established Eastern and Western front, like once the Allies land back in France, then you have these like two different theaters of war. And because neither side particularly likes the other, as far as the Soviets and the Western Allies, there are a lot of things done that are trying not to step on the other person's toes, or worried that if that person or that side takes that much territory and this side hasn't taken any territory in that area, that they'll just outright take it and it'll be theirs after this. And so you have this kind of really weird back and forth where the Soviets and the West are both fighting Nazis, and they're both allies technically, but they look at the other with, at the very least, like distrust. Right? And so it kind of makes for a little bit of a bizarre situation on who does what where. And so I could see why the Allies wouldn't want to, outright get involved in a situation that is literally right next to the Soviet front. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Is one of uncertainty and mistrust, as memories of the pact between Hitler and Stalin that had swallowed and divided Poland are still pretty fresh. If the Poles do nothing, then the Red Army will overrun Poland and the government in exile will be powerless in the newly communist Poland. But if the rising is successful, then Warsaw will be in the hand of democratic Poles. Then they hope that the autocratic Soviet Union can't simply impose its will on Poland, so the Poles have everything to win and everything to lose. However, the Germans still have strong forces in the region. If the resistance rises up before the Wehrmacht there can be wholly engaged with the Red Army, the Germans would most certainly crush them. So the Polish Home Army has to wait for the last possible moment when the Red Army is on the outskirts of Warsaw. Then, with logistical help from the West and cooperation from the Red Army, the insurgents could drive the Germans out of the city. At least one of those two last things has to happen, or the rising is doomed.
Do you remember when the Nazis was the rule on Poland? 1939, and the Allies turned away. From the underground rose a hope of freedom as a whisper. City in despair, but they never lost their faith.
Back in February, the resistance fighters outside of Warsaw had made contact with Soviet Marshal Rokossovsky's spearheads. Rokossovsky agreed to principal tactical cooperation, but refrained from promising anything beyond that. And when the Home Army then begins revealing itself to the Soviets, they are greeted with unexpectedly hostile behavior. The available reports of the NKVD, the Soviet Interior Ministry and Secret Police, paint a clearer picture of the situation. They call the Polish Home Army illegal formations, rebels, and bandits. They are white Poles allied to Great Britain and are an old enemy. See, although they currently...
See, this is what I was talking about, where both sides are technically fighting Nazis and working with each other. There is, there's hostility between the two sides already, and so it makes a lot of this stuff a lot more tricky. And the Soviets don't want to do anything that really outright helps the West, and the West doesn't want to do anything that outright helps the Soviets. And so there's kind of this chess match back and forth of how to beat and take down the Third Reich and also put yourself in the most advantageous position going forward, right? But nobody wants outright hostilities with the other side. So the West doesn't want an actual war with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't want an outright war with the West. They just don't look super fondly on each other.
Currently fight the same enemy. Polish nationalism is contradictory to Stalin's plan. And of course, it's only been a bit more than 20 years since the Poles won the Polish-Soviet War. And one of the people really responsible for the loss of the Battle of Warsaw back then was Joseph Stalin. The NKVD makes it clear that they will not allow any irregular or partisan actions in the rear of their armies. Soon, any Polish resistance fighters caught behind the front line is arrested, disarmed, and removed. By July, more than 30,000 Home Army fighters have been interned by the Red Army.
Jesus.
Inside Warsaw, the Home Army is caught between the desire for action and the need for caution. The atmosphere in the city is tense, and Pole and German alike feel that something is about to go down. By August, the Soviet front draws close, and while the Wehrmacht prepares to halt Soviet attacks across the Vistula, the Home Army decides to risk everything. On the night of August 1st, groups of armed young men break curfew and gather throughout the city. At 0500, they strike. German trucks are bombed and German patrols gunned down. They storm the railway office, the post office, and the major power station. Most importantly, they capture storehouses, taking German helmets and weapons, camouflage jackets, and even SS uniforms. To distinguish themselves from their enemy, they wear their white and red armbands or eagle insignias. Around 2,500 insurgents fall the first day, and many civilians are caught in the crossfire. But although they are not able to make the police district or the airport, the day is considered a success.
And 30,000 of them have already been arrested by the Red Army. Like, so you're already majorly hamstrung in this fight. But I guess the thought was like, you have a very short window to make this happen, and so jump in and try to make it happen. Like I said, this I have nothing but respect for people like this, because they're fighting for something. They're fighting for their home, right? Like, they're fighting for their home, for a future of self-determination, and they're doing it in a situation where everything literally has to go perfectly, or they know that they're going to lose. The chances of everything going perfectly are pretty low, and they take up arms and do it anyway. Like, tip of the cap for sure.
They have been able to free many Jews from the SS concentration camp known as Goose Farm, and even managed to capture a tank. Large parts of the city are now under their control, so they must continue the fight until help arrives. They inform London by radio that the fight for Warsaw has begun. On the night of the 4th, the first British bombers are spotted over the skies of Warsaw. The Poles rejoice as crates filled with weapons and supplies are parachuted in. They have not been forgotten by their allies. The Germans, however, are now reacting as well. Anti-insurgency specialist SS Obergruppenführer Erich von dem Bach arrives in Warsaw. He reports back to SS Commander Heinrich Himmler the real scale of the rising, and Himmler flies into a violent rage. He orders von dem Bach to not only crush the insurgency, but to obliterate Warsaw. The home of Polish history and culture is to be liquidated once and for all.
This sort of thing is wild to me, right? A lot of these older wars, I guess this one isn't like super old, but a lot of these older wars come down to, as far as the direction of the war, come down to like the personality and ticks of just a handful of people, right? Like, a handful of people more or less control the entire directive of the military. And in a situation like this, it's like the Soviet army is right there. You have done nothing but lose from, a quarter of the way through the Soviet Union all the way to now Warsaw. And the thought process isn't, okay, we've got to figure out a way to turn this around. It's demolish Warsaw because they rose up. Like, I get, I guess, the anger on the German side, but like, the Soviets are right there. Like, you're not holding Warsaw. So this just seems like this is the story of Germany in World War II, but it seems like a misallocation of resources for sure.
The Wehrmacht, however, had their hands full fighting the Red Army, so Himmler orders his own SS troops to Warsaw. What arrives at that city is an assortment of some of the most notoriously undisciplined, criminal, and murderous SS units the Nazis have to offer. The SS Brigade Dielewanger, the Russian SS Rona Brigade, Cossack and Azerbaijani auxiliary regiments, several Einsatzgruppen and military police units, and for a few days, these units take Himmler's orders literally. Fighting the insurgency almost becomes a secondary objective as they kill every man, woman, and child in sight and systematically set their homes on fire. Tens of thousands of people are slaughtered. It becomes so bad, with so many reports of rapes and looting, that von dem Bach has officers shot to try and rein in the men. He has to issue orders to not summarily shoot women and children anymore. The city becomes an urban battlefield. Loudspeakers.
God, he had to give an order. Like, he had to give a direct order not to shoot women and children. I know we talk about the brutalities of war and the way that civilian populations are treated during wartime, because historically it's just a bloodbath, right? But I don't know, something about it being a more modern war, and I don't know. I don't know. Like, geez, you had to give a direct order not to kill women and children. Like, that just, I don't know, that seems crazy to me. I know it seems naive, but I don't know. Rough.
Urged the insurgents to give up before they are all killed. The Luftwaffe and German artillery bombed the rebel districts, but the insurgents proved resilient. They hid in Warsaw's deep cellars and used the destroyed buildings to entrap the enemy. They lure them into killing zones where snipers and grenadiers await them. The ruined city denies the SS their numerical advantage, and after 2 weeks of fighting, neither side has that advantage. The Poles fight from the street barricades and fortified cellars connected by trenches and sewers. Women and children work tirelessly in underground kitchens, hospitals, and makeshift workshops. Days turn to weeks. By the end of August, though, even as the spirit of the insurgency is still high, the outside world is eerily quiet.
Women, men, and children fight. They were dying side by side. And the blood they shed upon those streets was a sacrifice willingly paid.
Even contemporary German sources expect the Soviets to try to link up with the insurgents as quickly as possible. The Red Army advances towards the Baltics and the Balkans, but not on the Vistula. Winston Churchill is among the first to make the assumption that this pause during the most critical moment of the Rising, where any Soviet attack might have tipped the scale, is deliberate. Rokossovsky stands just 20 kilometers away from...
Yeah, I mean, how could it not be deliberate? You would think in this situation, like, the Poles are holding off the Germans in the city. Any major force coming in is, and this is all over. So, I mean, how could it not be deliberate? It has to be. It has to be.
From Warsaw. How come, since the end of July, not one Soviet aircraft has been seen flying over Warsaw? No drop has been made, no shelling of German positions. Did Stalin condemn the Rising to its fate? For historians, it's impossible to know Stalin's exact inner motives. Many of the records regarding Poland are still sealed tightly in Russian archives. Reliable intelligence was certainly scarce, and the reports from the NKVD portray the insurgency as a reckless adventure by a gang of criminals and bandits. Polish nationalism has no place in Stalin's great strategy. The British will cancel their airlifts as well because of the inefficiency of sending planes from Italian air bases 1,300 kilometers away. There are actually over 200 U.S. Air Force planes stationed in Poltava, but Stalin denies them airspace over Poland. Inside Warsaw, losses are heavy on both sides. The Germans have been forced to reinforce the SS with crack units like the Hermann Göring Panzerdivision, and slowly but surely the insurgents are pushed back into the city center. Fighting continues unabated in the cemeteries, the suburbs, and the former ghetto, but by September the situation grows desperate. They have held out far longer than expected, but they cannot win a battle of attrition. Down to a quarter of their fighting strength, and with food and medical supplies dwindling, negotiations for surrender begin. But just then, in mid-September, the Soviets suddenly attack the eastern outskirts of Warsaw. It is General Berling's army, made up of Polish communists and collaborators, who attacked the German garrisons. Soviet planes now drop supplies, and Soviet artillery shells the city.
They were literally waiting for the... They were literally waiting for the Poles to give up. Like, that is so brutal. There's a, you know what, this has convinced me. We're gonna go down a whole rabbit hole later on of the Soviet Union and just how big of pricks they were, specifically under Stalin. But yeah, this is brutal.
All surrender negotiations are broken off and the Polish spirits rise. Volunteers swim the Vistula to greet their allies. But they never return. Reports soon reach the Home Army that those volunteers are arrested and interrogated about their holdouts and their officers, and some are even tortured and shot. Berling's attempt is not the long-awaited Soviet offensive. Rokossovsky does not move, and the insurgency is doomed. On September 18th, a large fleet of flying fortresses make one last supply run. But it is too late. Nearly all of the crates parachute into German territory as the insurgents are by now pressed into a small area in the city center. Left with only a handful of blocks and streets, the Home Army has no real choice. They can either surrender to the Nazis, who will probably murder them, or try to escape to the Soviets, who will likely turn on them as well. The final shot of the uprising is fired on October 2nd. It has lasted 63 days. Civilians and insurgents alike are arrested and sent to concentration camps. The ruins of the western part of the city are now once again occupied by the Germans. In the east, just across the river, the Soviets stand and watch. Poland, once again, is divided between the Germans and the Soviets, but not forever, for the old words ring true. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, póki nie śpiemy. Poland is not yet lost, as long as we live.
You know, we've talked
God, it's such a catchy chorus.
about a lot of stuff from different songs of yours that have to do with the Second World War, because you have a bunch of them and stuff. And you've met people and relatives, like Audie Murphy's relatives and stuff, and Helen Back and stuff. Did you guys ever meet anybody that actually had anything to do with the uprising itself?
Yeah, several actually. I remember the first couple of people we met. Obviously, we're talking about people who are really old, quite possibly dead now. This was back in 2010. A lot got lost in translation. It was an emotional experience, but it was really hard because, you know, speaking through a translator at a museum, we were at the Warsaw Uprising Museum, but a few days later, we were still in Poland then, we heard of a woman who had fought in the uprising. Her name was Anna.
Wow.
And she had moved to Sweden, actually, after everything happened there.
At the end of the war.
At the end of the war. But it was really one of those moments that I will never forget in my life, because we were speaking Swedish.
Yeah.
Old people in Poland, for obvious reasons, aren't very good at English.
Yeah, they're not very good at Swedish in general.
Yeah,
either.
but she lived in Sweden from, I guess, somewhere in the 40s until 2006, I think it was, or 2009.
Back.
So she just recently moved back when her husband died, I think it was.
Okay.
And speaking with her and her experiences, and it is so far away from the action movies and everything. I mean, her main role in the uprising, being a young woman or a young girl maybe, wasn't, you know, frontline combat. Right. But of course, she had to. They captured a tank, a German tank. I can't remember if it was a Leopard or something. They actually captured it.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And the story she would tell, it is nothing like the movies. Her stories of, delivering messages through the sewers and how cramped and tiny it was. I have no idea how it was, but at the Warsaw Uprising Museum in Warsaw, they have sort of reconstructed those sewers so you can walk through them. And they start out pretty big, then they get pretty small, and you can, you know, try and, you know, how they would move.
See how you could get, how far you could do it.
Oh man, if you're even slightly claustrophobic, you're fucked.
Yeah.
Her tale how such an obviously extreme circumstances, living under those circumstances, and still life goes on.
That's, you know, I'm glad that you put that out here, that it's not that the Warsaw Uprising or any war or any combat that you sing about and that we talk about is not what it looks like in the movies, because I think people misunderstand that, and I think people lose track of that this is the stuff we talk about on this channel and the stuff that they sing about it's very interesting, and it's important to remember these things for a variety of reasons, but it's
Yeah, I talk about this a lot. This is why I read bottom up history, right? Most of the history classes I've been in, most of the professors that I have had prefer top down history because it gives you a much broader view of everything that's happening, and you're kind of viewing the whole war through like the eyes of a general or a president or something like that, where you're looking at fronts and movements and supplies, but it's all very big picture. And I studied wars like that for forever because that was all that I had really known or ever been around, been taught, was that sort of broad look at history. But the thing was, it gives you a very like monotonous, numbers start running together, and it really detaches you from what is actually happening. And so I made a transition and started reading a lot more first person, just a normal troop at the front, reading diaries and books and things like that of those types of, maybe it's an officer, but it's an officer that is on the front. He's commanding a small group or contingent on the front, and he's living in a trench or whatever, but it's right there, and the day-to-day is what the day-to-day for the normal soldiers were. And it gives me a lot more realistic view, I feel like, of what was actually happening on the ground and what the reality of the war was. Because the reality of the war wasn't that this trench, moved 200 meters that way or this way or whatever. The reality of the war was, for hundreds of thousands or millions of people, the story of that frontline soldier. That's what it was, right? The experience of the shelling, or of tanks or aerial bombardments or whatever. That was the reality of the war for almost every soldier that fought in it. And so, yeah, the reality of war is brutal and bloody, and it's not something like that. We've had this long history of kind of like the camaraderie and nationalism and pride and things like that of joining up and going and fighting in war, and there is still some of that today. But if you view war through that lens, like I kind of did whenever I had that much more broad look, I would suggest going and reading some of the accounts from the soldiers that fought in World War One, because they went into war feeling that way. They went into war with these ideas of heroism and camaraderie and all of that stuff, and then the reality of what that war was just did not match what they thought. It's it's brutality, it's just the worst circumstances. It's hell on earth is what it is. And you see really great things come out of some people whenever they're in circumstances like that. On the flip side, you also see just the very worst of what humanity is capable of in situations like that.
It's not cool.
Nope.
It's not what you see in the movies. The movies, they want you to watch the story, great, but they also have to give you entertainment value, and
Yep.
war is not entertainment value. It's not cool.
No,
you
it's so much boredom. I mean, how fun would it be a movie about World War One? Somebody getting sick in a trench, going back to a hospital, going back to the trench, taking one step up, dead.
And that's your video game, and that's 3 weeks you've been playing the game,
Yeah.
and that's your first time over. Well, I mean, think of even some people we've covered, like Simo Heihe,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he would spend days iced in with ice in it to make there's nothing exciting or romantic about that. It is specifically mechanical, and it is specifically you can overcome the boredom. I couldn't.
Dude was a total badass, though. Like, just got to throw that out there. Because, yes, he did stay in the same spots for ridiculously long times. He was an incredible, incredible Finnish sniper, though. And I have a video on him. If you haven't seen it, I'll try to pin it somewhere on here. But if you don't know his story, dude was an absolute badass.
I'd have to pee. Yeah. I would. I'd have to pee at some point, you know.
But in a sense, I mean, I'm not comparing a warrior's life to what we are doing. Yeah. However, there is one similarity. What we are doing as musicians is sort of the Hollywood version, because what you guys see is us going on stage or hearing the album.
Yeah.
You're not seeing the rehearsals, you are not seeing the songwriting, the retakes, all of that. I'm by no means drawing the comparison, but it's a natural thing. No, I mean, no movie would be interesting if it was like the trenches in World War I, I think.
You're right, but people, especially with World War I and World War II, people say, what's the most realistic video game, or what do you think would be the most realistic? The most realistic video game is that you spend 3 or 4 weeks hastily training as an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old who lied about his age in England and stuff, and you get sick and you meet some new people and you hurt yourself, and then you go and you get another 3 weeks and you rotated through the lines and stuff, and you get killed in the first 20 seconds.
Yep.
And then you have to start the game all over, and you've just spent like 8 weeks playing that character, and that's as far as you got.
And you're lucky because you get to start over.
That's true.
They didn't.
Wow. Well, you know what? This episode, it is a hard-hitting episode. And to her, to Anna, and to all the other Annas, and all the other uprisings that were literally hopeless situations, but were still illustrative of the depths of the human spirit. Way to go.
All right, everyone, thank you very much for watching, and thank you so much for the support with the community. All the Patreons, everyone who's helping, sharing this, we really love doing this, and thanks to you, we can keep on doing it. So keep on doing what you do, and we will keep on doing what we do. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the Sabaton history for Uprising. Yeah, again, great song. Love the song. It's already on my Spotify playlist. But it's a kind of a rougher subject. I'm very curious how Poles look at this, right? Like, I want to know what context they view it from, and if maybe they view it differently, depending on whether they had family or whatever that was actually there fighting in the uprising or was killed or something like that. I'm very curious though. So if anybody Polish is watching this by chance, let me know. Let me know what the viewpoint of it is for a poll today. But that was a good one. I'll have another video out later today. It'll be a little bit shorter than this, but like, comment, subscribe, help me keep building the channel over here. I will put the link to the Discord down below. If you want to continue these conversations, you can join over there. But with all that being said, I'll see you all next time.